There's an old gospel song. It goes like this. Shall we gather at the river where bright angel feet have trod, with its crystal tide forever flowing by the throne of God? This morning we're gathering at the river, as you can tell. The people of God in the story of Joshua, when we encounter it, they've finally reached their destination. The promised land lies on the other side of the Jordan. And Joshua gathers the people there at the river's edge and tells them that what they're going to need to do is follow the Ark of the Covenant into the river to get to the other side. Now, the Ark of the Covenant is the sign of God's presence with the people. And if you've ever seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, Cheryl and I just watched it recently. You know what that ark looks like. Just watch the movie, and I don't know if it acts the way it does in the movie, but it looks that way, at least according to all of the analysis. So you have the Ark of the Covenant, and Joshua tells the people that when the feet of the priests who are carrying the ark touch the water, then the river will part. Basically, really what it is, the upper portion coming down from the Sea of Galilee is going to get cut off, and the rest of the river all the way down to the Dead Sea will turn dry, so that they, as the people of God, can cross over on dry land. We gather this morning at the river's edge to prepare for our own river crossing experiences. And it's called a sabbatical. And for the next 3 months, you and I, in our different ways, will be reflecting on the theme of river crossings. And just so you don't forget, well, we've decorated, I think dressed the sanctuary is the better word, for the events to come. As I prepared, and as I've been preparing for the sabbatical, besides making all the plans that go with that, I came across a book titled The Meaning of Rivers. I mentioned it yesterday, but this book describes the various ways that rivers function in American literature. And according to the author, the defining characteristic of a river is its flow, its fluidity. And this is how he describes our encounters with rivers. I decided to quote the whole thing because I think it's really powerful and helpful. He writes that rivers move, flowing over land through history and among diverse groups of people, changing considerably from their sources to their destination. They also stay permanent blue lines on our maps, constant waypoints, and lasting landmarks. Rivers connect state with state, interior with exterior, one region with another, the past with the present, but they also separate nations, subcultures, families. In short, rivers do not cede their meaning easily. So as the next few months go on, we'll encounter the rivers in all of their facets. But not just rivers, there'll be seas and lakes as well. But there'll be a lot of water that you're going to encounter over the next 3 months. And as we do so, as we consider the meaning of rivers and other forms of water, we're going to want to ask the question, how do they relate to our experiences with God, to our experiences as church, and our experiences with the world around us? And I discovered from my reading of the meaning of rivers that there are different ways of experiencing a river. Sometimes we'll just want to gather at the river, just kind of stand, just kind of be at the river, just be there for a while. And we'll just contemplate the flow of the river. You might want to use your imagination in that. And then there's other times when we're going to follow the Ark of the Covenant through the river. And sometimes, well, maybe we're going to need to get on a boat and float down the river so we can get to the place where we're going to cross over. So the question is, where and how are you going to cross over? How are you going to experience the river? And time and place are going to determine the choice. Now, back to Joshua. In the opening chapters of the book of Joshua, and Rick's preaching from Joshua 1 next week, so you're going to get a similar story, but from a slightly different perspective. I know Rick's working on that, and he's not going to say the same thing I am. So you have to wait and see what he's going to share. But in these opening chapters of Joshua, what happens is that the promise that God makes to Abraham and to Sarah comes to its fulfillment. And part of that process is the journey of the people of Israel out of slavery in Egypt through the wilderness so they could get to the river. Now, Moses led them to the point of getting to the river, but now it's a new opportunity, a new situation, and now it's a new leader in Joshua. And so now the people stand at the river's edge, and they can see across the river, and they're wondering, what will the river bring them as they go across it? Now, here's the thing. Crossing that river involves risk, because we don't know what tomorrow holds for us. I mean, I have some plans for tomorrow. I've already got some things calendarized. But when you cross the river, you don't know what's going to be there. You can see it, but you can't experience it until you get there. That river marks the end of part of the journey. But when you cross over, you begin a new chapter of the journey. And so there's a little bit of hesitance sometimes to cross over, but it's important that we do. The story of the Exodus and the eventual crossing into the Promised Land has always stirred the hearts of people seeking freedom from oppression and slavery. These are stories that fueled the imagination of slaves who believed that there was a better future for them. We hear these stories, the story of Joshua, the story of Moses, today, and we're thinking about it, on the very day 400 years ago that the first African persons were brought to this country, to the English colonies, the first slaves. This day in history, in Virginia, 400 years ago. Then if you go down to the Detroit waterfront, which hopefully many of you have, you'll find a monument to those intrepid women, men, and children who fled slavery and headed north towards freedom in Canada. We hear this story at a time when people are fleeing oppression in Central America and elsewhere, and they're hoping to find asylum in this country. They too hope to cross a river into a promised land. And so there's connections between the story and the experiences that down through history, but also to the present, that continue with us. Unfortunately, and here's the caveat, every time we preach from the book of Joshua, we have to always understand that there's a dark side to the story. There is the situation in which of conquest that we would rather that not be there, but it's there, and we have to acknowledge it. Because Israel's experience of freedom did come at the expense of the people living in the land. And we heard all the names of all the peoples who lived in the land who God, according to Joshua, was going to drive out. And here's the thing. This isn't an isolated experience or occasion. Down through history, the freedom for one group of people has often led to the loss of freedom for others. We only need to think about the Native American story to understand that reality. So we can only hear a word from God in the book of Joshua if we recognize and note this part of its story, but also of our story, and recognize it and deal with it. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to hear the word of God about river crossings. The story, though, that we hear this morning from Joshua 3 is one of many biblical stories that involve rivers. And many of these stories speak of moments of transformation. And over the next 3 months, we'll have the opportunity to listen for the voice of God and to discern the different ways in which God is leading us as a people. That future is going to involve change. And change can be scary, but change can also lead to blessing. So we just have to got to put our feet in the water and see if it parts in front of us. In Joshua 4, the people take rocks from the river and they set up a monument so that they can remember their journey into the promised land. And the stones that we see on the altar, on the table and in front of the table, the stones you're going to take home with you, the stones that are on the banner on the back of the sanctuary, they're all symbols of there's the monuments so that we can ask the question, where are we going? Where did we come from? We can envision our spiritual encounters with God in the form of water. In Joshua chapter 4, rocks and stones serve, according to the text, as a sign among you, so that when your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And when it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the Israelites a memorial forever. The story we hear in Joshua describes an act of faith. The people have to step out in faith if they're going to cross the river. But sometimes before we cross the river, we simply need to gather at the river and contemplate its flow. It might simply be a time, not for me, because I've only caught one fish in my life, but to cast a line into the river and to see maybe you'll catch a fish or two. Or maybe it's just time, a place just to lay back by the river, take in the sights and the sounds of the river. And when we do this, maybe we'll recognize the fragility of the river that lies in front of us. We might decide there's something we need to do about protecting those rivers. Rivers are fragile. And when once in a while it takes something like a river catching on fire to catch our attention. But there is an opportunity to do that. And perhaps we'll need to decide to travel down the river a little bit, get in that boat before we find the right place to cross over. And then when the time comes to cross over, well, there's a variety of ways we can do it. We could wait for the waters to part, but maybe we're going to need to take a ferry, or maybe build a bridge, or perhaps we might want to swim across the river. I don't know if any of you have ever swam across a river, but sometimes that's a possibility. And sometimes those rivers are shallow enough you can wade across. You don't have to wait. You just just walk across, and there it is. And get to the other side. Whatever mode of crossing we choose, the point is getting to the other side so we can see what God has for us on that other side of the river. For us as a congregation, and for me as a pastor, rivers and other bodies of water are going to serve as markers on our journey to the new future. Like I said, we don't know what lies on the other side, but over the next 3 months, we'll have the opportunity to listen for God's voice. And then when I return, we're going to have some series of important conversations about our future as a congregation. What will the future look like? Those are important conversations. And I'm already in conversation with a couple of my local colleagues about doing collaborative ministry. And I'm not sure where that's going to lead, but I'm excited by it. I'm really intrigued by it. A couple younger pastors that have reached out to me, and I've reached out to them, and we're in this conversation. And we don't know where that's going to lead. And Northminster is in the midst of seeking a pastor, and someone will come there and hopefully partner with us again. And so we just don't know what that all is going to look like. We just have to wait and see. But in the meantime, we have an opportunity to contemplate the waters that separate us from that future. Now, when there's different ways of reading Scripture and different ways of reading a passage like this, and when the ancient Christian theologian Origen contemplated the story of Israel crossing the Jordan, he envisioned the act of baptism. He suggested that Joshua was a type of Jesus. They're the same name, Joshua. Jesus is simply a Greek form of the Hebrew Joshua. So it's the same name. He envisioned Joshua as a type of Jesus, so that when we cross the river with Joshua, if we do that, that means that an experience of being baptized into Christ. And Origen says that when we are baptized into Jesus, we know that the living God is in us. That's good news. That's good news. Take hold of and consider. And I know that when Charlotte comes in October, she's going to do some work with baptism and maybe have a baptismal renewal theme for that Sunday. So you'll have an opportunity to reflect on your own baptisms. So now, as we contemplate the journey ahead, it's worth considering another saying. And this saying comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus. It's very profound. You cannot step into the same river twice. That's something I think we can all... Now, that's kind of a paraphrase of the Greek there, but I think it works. I think it goes with us. In other words, just as the water in the river is constantly changing as it flows by, the same is true of our lives. No 2 days are the same. We are not the same tomorrow as we are today. Life just moves on. Sometimes we forget that. I think every once in a while I forget that I've been here 11 years and that we've all aged a little bit. We're not as young as, some of us are not as young as we once were. Some maybe so, I don't know. If you can stop time, you're in good shape. But time flows by. Scott McMillan, though, reminds us in his book, The Meaning of Rivers, that writings, these things that he's been engaging with, that deal with crossing rivers often have a transformative quality, even though the physical distance may be minimal and the physical nature of there is not much different from here. It may not be a long distance from crossing that river physically, but there may be a lot of difference when we get to the other side. So, shall we gather at the river, the beautiful river, gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. I invite you now to stand and sing with me hymn number 489, Bless Now, O God, the Journey.